because our restaurants collectively own the service, we get one relatively influential restaurant that just goes out and does the sales process. And when you're hearing from your friend, hey, we're working together to recapture ownership of this drastically growing piece of our business, they're like, where do I sign? Like, get me onboarded as quickly as possible. And typically in any of these given markets, those restaurants also know the best drivers. So they just essentially bootstrap the driver network, and it costs us nothing. When we initially went to market with this model, we raised $100,000 from restaurants, and we've done over $33 million in sales in a handful of years. So you bootstrap these networks with a supply that has economic reason to find an alternative to the current options that they're dissatisfied with.
And Andy, I was at Tesla. Tesla was ultimately very connected with the cars, their data. They wanted to build an insurance. They take a lot of data from the vehicles to say whether you're a good driver or a bad driver. You also spent quite some time in the kind of vehicle space. Can you kind of speak to a little bit of where you see kind of these manufacturers kind of opening up APIs? Do they close APIs? What's kind of like the end goal for vehicle connectivity?
The basic lay of the land is that Tesla's 5 years ahead of everybody else, which is one product cycle. So they build a lot more of the connected vehicle stack than any other OEM does. So Ford will outsource their vehicle connectivity to Bosch, and if they want to update the vehicle over the air, they have to pay $1 million change order, and that's kind of the dynamic as it exists today. And Tesla's actually going in the direction of opening up more of the data from their vehicles. So they recently announced that they're going to start to let developers build on their fleet API, which means you're going to be able to get data directly from your Tesla and potentially also control the vehicle with third-party applications, which is really exciting. And they're doing it in a very decentralized way because they understand the value of having third-party developers come and build on top of their hardware product. So it's yet to be seen like exactly the nature of that program, but the early indications are that they're kind of doing what they just did with the charging network, which is sort of flexing on all the other OEMs and saying like, we're going to start to really, put pressure on you to be more consumer friendly when it comes to the data from your vehicles, and also to attract developers like me to come and build on top of their vehicles, and they know that makes the product better, and it's what the consumers want. So I think the arc of history when you talk about things like ride to repair and consumers just general awareness of data ownership is really pointing in the direction of people wanting to be able to control the data from their most expensive asset. And for the most part, the other OEMs I think are going to be sort of having their hand forced to comply with this, and some of them will lean into it really heavily, and I think there is a competitive advantage in them starting to integrate directly with something like Demo and take advantage of the fact that the smartest developers in the world don't work at your company, and also the market is always going to be able to provide better financing, better insurance options than what you can provide with a one-off partnership with an insurance carrier or your captive financing arm. So we're really leaning into maxing out the decentralization and openness because we think that's really where things are going.
Perfect. How are we doing on time?
Any audience questions?
I've got a good one. So I used to work at a major competitor to Uber, and I actually pitched them. I said, decentralized networks are probably going to eat your business. And I think that's the reason I don't have a job anymore at that.
You were right.
And so is there a limit for any supply-demand marketplace? Do you think that it's just going to eat, decentralized networks are going to eat all of these guys? Or do you think there's any efficiencies, say like thermal efficiencies of servers, or something that's going to keep some of these centralized players in holding power?
Is this question for me because I'm the decentralized DoorDash guy?
I think it can apply to anything, but do you see any limits?
So I think that the initial problem for the protocol itself is still the same problem that Uber might have had in day one, which is you still have the cold start problem. But once you crack the cold start problem in some of these markets, you have this instantly accessible open network of buyers and sellers of which developers can build any product against. And that means that solves probably the biggest problem that any builder in this room has, which is the way that you start a company today is you have to go find a venture capitalist, raise a bunch of money, hire a sales team, acquire supply and demand, and then like push your product to market. Ultimately, that means that your users are going to be dissatisfied in a marketplace context because your net revenues are represented by what you steal from them. So at the point where a network gets sufficient adoption, that cold start problem no longer exists for developer ecosystems that want to implement that protocol standard. And then you get this sort of Cambrian explosion of new applications of which consumers are free to choose their favorite one. I think we're seeing actually a lot of examples of this, like both in blockchain and outside of blockchain, and I think it represents probably one of the largest wealth transfers in human history if we could just like keep building on this. So hopefully I answered your question.
Well, I think we're at time, but John, Andy, Mike, Carlos, thank you so much. We just scratched the surface of really this, so come find them afterwards. They can tell you much more about each of our